Awesome. All right, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm really excited about this workshop. It's really special to me. I'll go over that a little bit more in our introductions, but today we have 90 minutes and about half that time, so about 45 minutes is going to be interactive instruction. So it's not just going to be me talking through slides, we're going to be doing some group work together as a whole, and then you'll break out into Zoom rooms with our 4 TAs to do the hands-on exercises as a group, and then feel free to unmute and ask questions at any time, or you can drop them in the chat. One of our 4 TAs will help out with that, so teaching assistant. And we're going to go over the agenda in a minute, but I really wanted to cover really quick up front what this won't cover, just to set expectations. So we're not going to cover anything around the technical writing role or responsibilities, or anything about publishing tools or workflows, because the goal of this workshop is to help you become a better writer in whatever role you have. So whether you're a solutions architect, a developer, or an SRE, etc., this content is meant for you. And we will be focusing on HashiCorp Learn content because I work on the education team here at HashiCorp, but these concepts can apply to any written communication. So you can take this and you can use it to write better blogs, even emails and cover letters, and then reference documentation as well if you are a technical writer. And this content will help you communicate complex topics more simply. I'm going to go ahead and start with this quote from George Orwell that I like a lot. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there's a gap between one's will and one's declared aims, one turns instinctively to long words and exhaustive idioms. I just find this so true as a writer and an editor. And I also think it really highlights, slight spoiler, that it's really important to have a well-defined task and task steps. So, because you want to write to accomplish that specific task. And you want to avoid things like secondary motives or secondary goals that are unstated. So it's fine to have multiple goals as long as they're upfront and stated. And then also here at HashiCorp, we do use George Orwell's 6 key principles for our style guide. And then why write clearly or try to write clearly when it's easier to write quickly? What are the benefits? Clear writing decreases ambiguity that causes alternative meanings. And then here at HashiCorp, we optimize, our guiding principles optimize for readability and skimmability, and this is really aimed for both non-native speakers and the 2 AM operator. And then we want to help everyone save time by using standard practices, so authors aren't having to reinvent the wheel on the format of something or which word choice they should use. And then that also helps us be consistent. So then the reader is getting a consistent experience from across all of our documentation and tutorials. And then, like I said, we use George Orwell's 6 principles, which is pretty standard in technical writing. So then our writing is a little more consistent within the industry as well. So hi, I'm Kaitlin Carter. I'm an education architect here at HashiCorp. I started about 3 years ago here as the first full-time console education engineer with Judith, who's on the call. She was the second, so we go way back. And that's also why you're going to see a lot of console team on the call helping out. But I have a background in instructional design, so I earned an instructional design certificate through some coursework at a local university here. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing technical education and writing and editing. I'm really passionate about it. I'm very interested in it. It's a good niche. It's challenging, and there's a lot of really good standards and a lot of interesting concepts to work through. But like I said at the beginning, this workshop's really special to me because when I first got started doing technical writing, it was from a really good workshop I took back when I was a support engineer at Puppet Labs. My manager recommended that I take this internal workshop because, to be honest, I was a terrible writer. I knew I was a terrible writer. Everyone on the team knew I was a terrible writer. It was identified as a skill gap. And I took the course and it was really interesting. It obviously it helped improve my writing and it helped me become interested in this field. So that's why this is a very special workshop for me. So I'm going to share my key takeaways from that original workshop because they did stick with me this whole time. And I kind of challenge you to think about what you'll take away today and like your key takeaways. I have the cutest public service announcement that is actually unnecessary now. So you might have all gotten an email saying, welcome to the workshop from Kaitlin Carter and Barky Boy. Well, this is Barky Boy. His name's Timber. He barks a lot. And that is actually why he's not here today. He's out with a pup sitter. I was going to say he's out in jail because he murdered someone, but because that's a little toy knife he has there. He's cute and he's busy. And you all don't have to listen to him bark today. Who we do have, though, is these four wonderful TAs, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Judith. I run the Terraform education team at HashiCorp. So we look after the information architecture of the docs and also the tutorials on learn.hashicorp.com/terraform. I also started as a terrible writer, so I'm also very passionate about this subject.
Hey everyone, my name is Carl Cardenas. I run the console education team as well as Nomad and a few other of our products. I've also not always been a good writer. English is not my first language, so it's something that I struggled with for a long time. So I think you're going to see a common pattern in all of us that no one's born a perfect writer. So kudos to you for signing up for this workshop and wanting to improve that skill set.
Hi, everybody. I'm Daniele, and I've been in HashiCorp for 3 years, and I started in support, and education wasn't ever in my plans. I didn't study for it. And also for me, this is something completely new, and I'm learning into it for the past like 1.5 years.
Hi, I'm Adam. I'm a technical writer here at HashiCorp. I work on the console project. My background is actually writing. I come to it from the other end, and I'm learning about the technology side of things. So welcome to the workshop.
All right. So I've broken this workshop down into 3 parts. In section 1 and 2, we're going to cover how to get started writing. So first we'll work on writing a really good specific task, and then we'll practice creating task steps for that specific task. And we'll finish with group exercises, and that's when you'll go into breakout rooms with a TA. And we'll actually have, after each part, we're going to have a set of labs. And then section 3 and 4, I'll provide some guidance and tips for technical writing. We're going to cover how to use our style guides to write more clearly and consistently. And then we'll finish in section 5 with the different stages of editing, including how to self-edit. And we'll finish with our final set of exercises. Any questions before we keep moving? Are we good on the logistics today? Awesome. I'll take that as we're good on the logistics. So how to get started writing? Well, you get started with a really good specific task, and you can start by asking yourself or thinking about what is the specific task the user will accomplish. This is a kind of a general starting point here at HashiCorp, and for instructional design course development, generally, you can get started with, by the end of this tutorial, the user will. And so if it's easier to get started by completing a sentence, which we find it is, this is how we get started with our main goal. And then you'll probably notice that this actually tends to get converted into, in this tutorial, you will. So you'll see this throughout our Learn tutorials, and you'll see this on other sites as well. I was just on DigitalOcean looking at one of their guides, and they use the same format. In this tutorial, the user will, or in this guide, the user will, because they use guide instead of tutorial. And I want to call out very first, like at the beginning of this, you can reuse good writing, even at this very early stage. So like, yes, you're just writing the very first sentence of your tutorial here, but if it's well written, you get to reuse it and save yourself time. And you're going to see that throughout the presentation today. So by the end of this tutorial, the user will deploy a console data center into production. And before, we're going to review several of these from Learn, but before we do, I want to go over the best practices so you can think about them as we go through the examples. So specific task should be specific but to the point. It should include one action verb. It should include the main technologies you'll use, and it should generally exclude any environment information. So some more examples are, by the end of this guide, the user will build a VirtualBox image with Packer and TeamCity. By the end of this blog, the reader will update Nginx load balancer and configurations with console template. By the end of this article, the reader will modify an EC2 instance on AWS with Terraform. So you can see that all of those specific tasks were short and to the point. They were one sentence. They included their action verbs: build an image, deploy console, update Nginx, and the technologies they would use: console and Nginx, TeamCity, and Packer. And they all excluded the environment information. There's one caveat to that I want to call out, and if the task is an operations task, then you need to include the environment information. So there is one exception there. But for all the other tasks, you'll cover environment information in the prerequisites or in the introduction, so you don't need to focus on those right away. So once you have your really well-defined specific task, you can start to create the tasks. And it may be obvious, but it's really important to put the steps in order, because they're going to be easier to follow, and it's going to reduce the extraneous cognitive load for the reader. And this is an instructional design concept that says, wants us to reduce the amount of energy a user spends trying to understand what to do. So we want to help the user or the reader get to do the thing that's in their specific task and not worry about side things or learning extraneous information. So we'll go ahead and review the best practices for writing task steps before we practice. So you should think first things first. So steps should be in logical order. Each step should build on the previous. And you can ensure logical order by testing it. So do the steps make sense? Did you miss any key steps? Can you run the code snippets or commands in order successfully without referring to the text? Ask a peer for a quick look. It's really natural for us as humans to fill in the blank when we know something's supposed to be there, especially for our own writing. So there's no shame in asking someone to take a quick look. And then if you have your really well-defined task steps, you can use that as your outline. So again, like if you're taking the time to write well, then you just keep getting to build and reuse what you have. So working off our previous example, deploy console data center in production, let's think about what those task steps would be. Well, first things first, the user should probably download the binary. And since it's a data center, they're going to want to distribute it to all the nodes. And then they're going to want to configure the agent before starting console. And then as a bonus step, they probably want to make sure it's working properly. So now you kind of have an outline and section headers. So writing it simply like this, you can see that these are going to be really nice section headers. And then again, as you continue to fill it out, you can make it more specific and fill in these sentences. And these sentences will probably be your first 1 or 2 sentences for each section. So you won't change the specific task. Notice it's still the same, but we're just filling in details like select the latest version of console and download the binary. And at this point, you can also start adding in your code snippets and example files. But I do want to point out as well, when you have the steps well defined and kind of modular like this, you can work on it section by section. As well, kind of work in an interactive environment. So when you don't want to have to reread from the beginning every time. So when you do it little by little, you can come back and just reread one section or redo one section. So let's practice as a group. One thing we haven't talked about though is the audience. I do want us to like pause and think about the audience for a minute, because that's going to help us narrow down the scope of the steps. It's going to help us be specific with our task. So for our specific task, create a GitHub repository. Let's assume our audience is new to GitHub and version control, and maybe we've been asked to create a guide for new developers in a boot camp. I'm going to start with the first one. I'm going to let you all unmute or drop in chat what the following steps could be. So the first step is probably to create a GitHub account at github.com.
Sorry, I'm going to GitHub to remind myself.
Oh, great. You kind of just, you gave away, yes, create a repo. Another tip that I was going to cover after this, which is if you're unsure, test it. You can start testing right from the beginning, even the task steps, because it's definitely going to make it easier, and it's going to be much easier to get to that logical order.
I assume this is like a personal repo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Logging in. Well, would the second step be, and I haven't gone through the process of creating the account in a long time, would the second step be log in with that account?
Probably either log in or maybe like verify your email. There's probably a verification step. So yeah, we won't go through all of this. I actually don't have the solution for this one. I'll have to make a note to make the solution for this one for the next presentations. But yeah, like that's great. Just test it out. Quick testing's great. What I used to do when I first got started writing was I would just look at the history of my command line. So whatever I had been doing in there, I'd look at that and I'd copy and paste it. And sometimes that would be my headers or my outline, or at the very least, the original code snippets. So testing is very useful. But now we get to break out and try some exercises for real. We are going to have 2 exercises in this and about 15 minutes to work in the small groups. So for exercise 1, you're going to order the task steps that I've already created. And then you're going to create the specific task for it. So it's working backwards a little bit, but that's okay. You wouldn't normally do that, but these are just exercises in the workshop. And then the second exercise, you're going to finish writing out the task steps for a predefined task. Let me drop in to the chat the labs, even though your TAs will also all have the labs. And I'll go ahead and switch over to show you all what that looks like. So I deployed this with GitHub Pages, just in case people weren't comfortable with the GitHub repo. But if you are comfortable with the repo, you can go ahead and click on this and you can clone this, you can fork it, you can create a PR if I've made a mistake later if you want. I would definitely wouldn't say no to that. But then we have our exercises here, and I did create a second set of exercises, and as in your breakout rooms you can decide which one you'd like to work on. One is more on the CLI and one is more for working through task steps in the UI. So this is what they'll look like, and then you can use the back button or click on that to get back to the main page. I really spent like 15 minutes deploying this, so I haven't given a lot of thought to making it a beautiful website. But it will be live, forever. Like I don't ever plan on taking this down, so it'll be here if you don't finish. And it's okay if you don't finish, because this will be here forever. So I'm gonna go ahead and send you into breakout rooms, but go ahead and feel free to ask questions now while I'm sorting that out, because that will take a second.
Do you have any, with groups, do you have any special suggestions? Like, do you want, how are we going to bring back the results? after the breakout session, or will the TAs share how they want us to work together?
Yeah, your TAs will scribe for you. So don't worry about Google Docs or logistics.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good.
And then when we come back, I might ask for a volunteer to share their work, their solutions, but I do have sample solutions for these ones.
Okay, I'm good.
Kaitlin, oh, perfect.
Yeah, sorry, I just opened them up, and I'll see you all back in 15 minutes.
See that. So for my group, do you guys want to talk about our steps and our logic?
Sure. For 1.1, I think our first step, we assume that since they already know about Docker, so we don't have to walk them through the whole Docker installation process. So we can just jump straight into telling them just get the image, the Docker image for console itself. It's been a while since I started up console, but you find a server client, get the server started up first. Then you get the client. Then you can get both of them to talk to each other. And then the assumption is that console UI should be up and running at that particular address. So I think that was the logic that we were working at.
Awesome. Does another team want to share their exercise 1.2, or do you want to hear from Carl seeing some more?
Was 1.2 the main task, or was 1.2 the, hold on,
1.2 is the vagrant task.
we didn't make it to 1.2.
Okay.
You guys want to share where we ended up?
Sure. I don't think
Okay.
we didn't get to 1.2 either, though.
Yeah, we did not get very far, but I'll share where we ended up here. Okay. So we also, I think, got the same sort of steps with my bad typing. But here is our final statement about what the person would learn. So I think that we were happy with this.
Nice. I see that it's operations focused, and so that's good to have it focus on the data center and the one server and one agent. Nice. So I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen, and I'll give just a quick overview of the solutions for these, and then we'll keep moving. And I'm going to give the solutions for I'm not going to give the solutions for the vagrant one. I am going to share the slide deck. So if you all want to, like, later today to finish the vagrant one on your own, you can do that. So for 1.1, my example solution specific task was deploy console containers with Docker. So, and it's totally fine to have varying answers, and you'll see that too when you work through the vagrant one on your own. Like, because we're all going to fill in some of the blanks because I didn't give complete like descriptions of the audience, and so it's fine that they vary a little bit. And it's kind of like author personality as well. So that's right, you want to get the image, deal with server, deal with client, connect them, and then look at localhost. And so for 1B, I'm also not going to show you that one because you can go do it later if you want. For both of those. So we'll just go ahead and get moving to the write clearly, unless there's any questions about the task and task step sections.
I wanted to highlight something kind of smart that my team did, actually. My team, they had you visit the UI on the server before you connect them to verify that the server was up, because you would have a hard time connecting the client and the server if the server wasn't up. So I thought that was a really smart, like, kind of verification step.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so again, like it's okay to have some varying and some differences when you're writing. It's natural, and it's kind of nice to, each author is going to have a little bit of their own take and personality on things, so it's always neat to see that. So in this section, we're going to cover tips for writing clearly and why you'd want to focus on clear writing and what makes writing unclear, and then we're going to review the main style guide that we use here internally. So we went over these benefits at the beginning. I'm not going to go over them again. I'm just going to mention that we have these guiding principles here in our style guide, that we want to make content readable, skimmable, efficient, and consistent. So what makes writing unclear? Trying to sound friendly can make writing unclear. I personally fell into this trap when I first got started. Um, and it's especially easy to do when it's beginner content and you do want to be, you want to be there for the person. And that's my background in support was definitely like, I'm going to hold your hand through this process and work together and like, let's reduce anxiety. But for technical writing, you don't need that friendliness. You don't need that to handhold the reader. So that'll just make it unclear and cause you to write a lot more than that's necessary. Another thing that causes unclear writing is when you just don't have time to think about it, which again, like I'm definitely guilty of having to write like quick emails or quick Slack messages and then being like, oh wait, that didn't come across like the way I wanted it to, and so I have to follow up. And then another one I see pretty often is where assume the material or top is supposed to be difficult because the topic is complicated, which just isn't the case. You can communicate complicated topics clearly and concisely as well. So in this section, we're going to practice these three concepts on how to write clearly. So less is more, which is mainly like less is more. It's very self-explanatory, but I wanted to call it out because it is easy to get excited about a topic and want to write a lot about it and talk about the complexities and rabbit holes and be really descriptive. I've done this for sure. And that can be great for like a workshop or a webinar, but users really just want you to get to the point and they a lot of times just want to skim, so less is better for them. And we're going to practice this in a minute, so because you only really want to provide the necessary information to succeed at the task when you're writing like tutorials and blogs and such and emails. And then short sentences is like less is more, but more granular, and we'll cover the difference in a minute. So there's a technical audience. They're interested in the topic and getting to the point. They aren't interested in finding like a beautiful sentence that was just crafted so amazingly. And then finally, style guides are your best friend. They're created to help you write clearly and concisely, so use them. So let's practice this concept of less is more with this Packer tutorial for beginners, and this is on Learn and a Get Started collection. And I'm going to go ahead and start by reading the original sentence. The version attribute is optional, but we recommend using it to constrain the plugin version so that Packer does not install a version of the plugin that does not work with your template. So that might have been a little hard to listen to, a little hard to parse. It was a little difficult for me to read. So to reduce this down to the core message, we want to remove negative language, repeated terms, and extraneous words. Extraneous words are going to be context dependent. So for Learn, the extraneous terms in this is optional and recommended. So we expect our users to come to Learn for recommendations, so we don't have to say it's a recommendation necessarily. And then optional information is usually held in our reference documentation. So we can remove that as well. So for negative, I highlighted our negative language here, does not. Again, those are also repeated terms, constrain, and then our other repeated terms are, we've got version in there, plugin in there a couple times. So when we remove all of that, what we're left with is set the plugin's version attribute to ensure that it is compatible with the Packer template. It's a lot easier for me to read, hopefully a lot quicker to hear, because we reduced this by more than half. So short sentences is useful, this concept is useful when everything is completely necessary and important information. Like there's not necessarily in repeated terms or negative language that you want to remove. Everything is important, but you want to reduce it down to shorter sentences from like one longer sentence. So I've highlighted the key terms in the main subject here, and we'll go over that in a second, but does someone else want to read this aloud?
I'm happy to, but I tend to volunteer too much, so I want to give somebody else the opportunity if they'd like.
Sure, I'll have a read of it. Since you are going to need permissions to write ACLs, namespaces for console enterprise, and KV objects, and that list of content managed by the console migrate to might increase in the future, use a token created using the global management policy.
Thank you. It probably felt like a lot.
Yes.
I got most of that, but I've read this like a million times. So the core message here that I've highlighted and hopefully we picked out from that was we're trying to convey what permissions you need for the management of various data. So you're going to need write permissions. The data you want to manage is ACLs, namespaces, and KV objects, and then some console specifics that are important to this sentence is global management policy and tokens. So again, we have them side by side, and Michael, if you want to read the short sentence here, since you like to volunteer, we'll jump in and help out.
Sure. For the migration, use an ACL token with the global management policy. It will grant you permissions to write ACLs, KV objects, and namespaces.
Nice, very to the point. And again, you can see like even with everything being important in a sentence, we were still able to reduce some of the text a lot. And we've broken it down into 2 sentences. So if you have to go back and reread something, you don't have 30 words to reread. You're going to have like 10 words to reread at a time or skim. All right, so now let's talk about our style guide, our internal style guide. So the goal is clear writing, and we follow these 3 key principles to have a consistent voice at HashiCorp. And these are all for sentence structure itself. So we always try to use active voice, present tense, and directive language. So active voice meaning this file configures, Terraform deploys, present tense, now configure, set the variable, and directive, open a browser, download the binary distorted infrastructure. So a good example of this comes from a Terraform tutorial. To install Terraform, find the appropriate package for your system and download it as a zip archive. So it's active, install Terraform. It's present, find the package, and it's directive, download it. And when you break it down like this, you can see it is really easy to skim as well. Install, find the package, download. So I've updated the sentence to be kind of the opposite of what we're looking for. There's a bad example. You can install Terraform by finding the binary and downloading it. You will need the appropriate package for your system. So it's conditional you can, future, finding, downloading, and passive you will need. So even like this, that's not consistent with our voice. It's not too terrible to read or hear, but this is only a couple of sentences. Imagine if this was an entire tutorial or blog that was 1,000 or 2,000 words, having all this extra text that we have to parse. So keep in mind, even though some of these examples are small, the issue compounds itself when you have bigger pieces of text. So those are our key principles, and we also have guidance for word choice. And these are also, both are based on Orwell's 6 principles, but we've added some to ensure our language is inclusive. So the first one I want to call out is you versus we. I bolded you because it's always going to be you. We have one exception here, which is we can use we for HashiCorp recommendations, but even that isn't terribly, it's not the best idea, and we still try to avoid that because it can be unclear when we use we to mean like we as in we HashiCorp does it for you, or who the we is. So just be specific at all times. So instead of like we update the load balancer configuration, say console template updates the load balancer configuration. So use you for when the reader is doing it, and use whoever's doing the action, or whatever product, tool, technology is doing the action because then there's no ambiguity there. We want to avoid ableist language like run the command, see the output, and that will also help you reduce unnecessary and extraneous terms. Don't use metaphors, similes, or jargon. So configuring Vault is as easy as, or even saying things like config file instead of configuration file. Use short words and kind of unnecessary ones. We kind of just worked on these concepts in the last 2 exercises. And then always use a Oxford Commonalist. And then these recommendations are usually for word choice and sentence structure, but style guides can help you be consistent with the structure as well. So we have I'd say several style guides internally to help with everything from word choice to the overall structure of the content. And we're going to go over how we structure the learn content kind of based on our style guide in the next section. But before we get there, I want to finish with some tips, and we're actually going to already be moving into our next set of exercises. So use a style guide when you have one. And if not, you can look at some common practices online, like the Orwell's 6 key principles. Read it aloud. Do the pauses seem natural? Is it easy to read? We practice that a little bit today. And then practice. It is a learned skill, so practice anytime you get a chance. For an email, a long Slack message, I will even sometimes practice in a text message where I'm like, oh wait, no, this is unnecessary language here, and I'm just going to cut these few words out to make my message more clear. And then find an editor. Editors can really help you learn to write better. I know working with editors have definitely improved my writing, even after writing for several years. And just seeing that process is really helpful. All right, so we're going to break out into groups again. This exercise is going to be a little bit shorter. So, and we just have one, which is simplify a complex sentence. So it will be just this one here. So you have your original sentence about vagrant, and then you're going to update it. I do want to, if you want for later, more work, more exercises, I have a hidden exercise in here I'm going to point out for you all in the GitHub repo under exercises too, which is to write an introduction to the CAP theorem. And we're not going to do this today because it would take way too much time. But this is if you want to practice writing and here's something to write about. All right, so let me open breakout rooms again.
When you guys are writing your guides, do you have a kind of a process for selecting how something gets phrased? If there's maybe, let's say you have 2 people that have different views on how it should be presented to the reader.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely like to have these discussions as well on the team and like go into kind of like its philosophy. But typically we'll go back to the audience analysis for when we have like 2 varying opinions and just making sure that we've agreed upon the audience and that yeah, that it's going, that goal, whichever goal is going to meet it. And that's if it varies, there's more variance, like some wording choice variance is totally fine and it really can mean the same thing. But yeah, like going back to the audience analysis and being like, who is this for? What skills do they have? What can we possibly leave out?
Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to open up all rooms, and again, you have 10 minutes to work together here.
Hi, sorry for joining a bit late.
No
Um,
worries. Do you want to be assigned to one of the groups and do group work, or do you want to catch up with me?
I think catching up with you would be great.
Okay.
Just to kind of give you kind of an idea of where I'm at. So I want to practice, with technical writing a little bit, and I'm currently on the learning team. I've done some writing in the past, but not in from like a technical type of sense. I think everything I've learned is mostly like, you know, stuff I figured out myself. So it's good to be able to see kind of like a official like standard that you practice and things like that. So um that's kind of a quick summary of where I'm at with this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I am recording this, so we will distribute that afterwards. So whatever you've missed from this point, you can come back and rewatch. I'm also going to send out my slides as a PDF.
Awesome.
And these exercises that I gave a brief overview to, they're here for you to follow along after the fact, and you can click into them and work on them later if you want, or at least like review them to see what you missed.
Mhm.
Trying to think what else. We spent the first part, spent a good amount of time on just getting started and writing the specific task and task steps and like building up that process to make the writing portion go more smoothly.
Mhm.
And now we're kind of on the writing portion. We're gonna have like one more section on writing before we talk about editing. Trying to think what else.
Do you feel like the remaining portion of this meeting really depends on the stuff in the beginning? Because
No,
oh,
especially
okay.
for the editing section. So for me, I know like it was really hard for me to find any kind of online content that wasn't just written about editing. So like the editing stuff is good, and then we're gonna talk about our learn style guide and tutorial template and how we structure our content to make it easier to parse. So that's all like not dependent necessarily on on the previous sections.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but we only have about half an hour left.
Yeah.
So cool. Where do you work on the learn team?
I work at Expedia. And the team I'm on is the learning team. So it's a new team that was formed, and the stuff that I've been working on is for engineers.
Nice.
So it's interesting because like I my past role was an engineer, just building out, stuff that people are asking for. And as an engineer, you don't normally think about how people are going to interpret what you read. So this is why, I signed up for this workshop, because it's different. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely. I've also noticed a lack of this type of training for technical audiences. Like writing for technical audience is definitely different than writing for a non-technical audience. But I feel like developers who go on to write make pretty good writers because they already have that like logical mindset of like first this, then that, and we cover that in the beginning as well. Of like you need to make sure steps are in logical order. So we've definitely seen a lot of good engineers write. A lot of engineers write good content.
Yep. Yeah.
I know there's only a few minutes left, but I'm going to go ahead and assign you to breakout rooms so you can kind of just listen in to what they're working on. So I'm going to assign you to Judith's room.
Okay.
And I'll see you in a few minutes. All right, I think we're all back again. I hope everyone was able to finish that one. I do have the sample solution here. And since I'm going to send you this deck all later, I'll let you review that later against yours. And yeah, we'll figure out how to distribute those Google Docs to each of you as well. So we have not a lot of time left and 2 more sections in a lab. So I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit. So second to last section, we're going to talk about templates a little bit because they're also there to help you write clearly. They are going to provide a recommended structure. The one we're going to cover today is from Learn, but you can actually pick up what the style of the structure of content is just by looking at it. So you could have discerned what our template was just by reading a few of our tutorials. So if you can take that and you can use that with other places as well. And our template isn't necessarily unique. You will see this with other pieces of content. So all of our tutorials are going to have 3 main sections, essentially: an intro and prerequisites to help the users get started. And this is where your original audience analysis comes in handy. We didn't talk about that a lot today, but you really should think about who you're writing for when you're writing that specific task. And then it should answer the questions who, when, and why, and really reassure your reader that they're in the right place and that they have everything they need so they can just get started and focus on the steps. And then there's the task steps, and we narrow this down to 5 to 7 steps, which will also be your H2 headers. And this is from the education theory that adults can retain 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. And then finally, there's a next steps where you're going to summarize what the reader has learned, which also comes as a recommendation from instructional design. And then we like to add any deeper discussions to our next steps and links to additional resources. Because if a reader likes your content, they're probably going to want to continue to read and learn more. So here's a Terraform example of an intro and prerequisites. You might notice first thing that it's short. It's 2 short paragraphs for the intro and then just a bulleted list for the prerequisites. And this is intentional because people just want to get started doing things right away. But we do have our main goal, which is to manage similar resources with count. We have our who, which is you. We have when in this tutorial. And then we have the why, which is multiple instances within one block. And then in the prerequisites, you want to make sure you have everything they need, all that environment information, so that they don't get hung up on dependencies. You can link out to other instructions here for sure to keep it short. We do that a lot. And then you can even add previous knowledge and experience if you think that's really important. So you might say something like, for the console container ones, previous experience with Docker, and that would be adequate. Then you're going to get into the task steps, and this is really the information that you want your user to retain, and so you want to make it easy to parse and track. You can see from our drop-down, it's displayed here, our drop-down. This is intended to give users an idea of what they're going to do right from the beginning. So you should be able to read this navigation and understand what you're going to do, how you're going to get from point A to point B. And also it should be clear on how to like reorient yourself to the tutorial if you have to come back to it. Because again, we all work in interrupt-driven environments, so if you get pulled away, you want to be able to come back, look at this navigation, and figure out where you were at. And then the next steps will kind of depend on the length of the tutorial. So this was a really long tutorial, so the summary is long, and that's all right. And then again, you can see there's some further discussion here. Okay, let's finish up with self-editing.
Kaitlin, we missed your last 2 sentences because your audio changed.
Dang it. My headphones died, so you're also going to hear my laptop fan now. I'm sorry. These are really old AirPods, and they like to die. Next steps is.
We just lost you again.
Am I back? Okay.
Yes.
I guess they reconnected when I put them away. Oh, technology. Yeah, so your summary is going, or your next step is in summary is going to depend on the length of the tutorial, so that's fine. This is the end, so it's fine to have further and deeper discussions. You don't have to necessarily worry so much about keeping it super brief and to the point, but you definitely want to include where to find additional information. Okay, let's talk about self-editing and all things editing to finish up today. We're going to talk about why edit, the stages, and then tips for self-editing. And then we'll have our final exercise. So editing is the final polish. It helps clarify the message and fixes mistakes. It helps to ensure that the voice is consistent to your company and just the piece itself is consistent. It ensures that the content meets the original goal and is essentially easy to follow. So here are the 3 stages of editing that we do at HashiCorp. There are actually more stages of editing, but I think our editing generally falls into these 3 categories. So you can do all 3 or just one when you're reviewing someone else's work, depending on their request. But when you're self-editing, you'll need to do all 3. And you will, even if you have an editor, will want to do some level of self-editing just so your editor is not spending a ton of time on your work. And then these should be done in order. They progress from the macro view at the structure level to the micro view at the copy level. So the first stage of editing is structural, and this is going to be to review for the effectiveness of the message. You're going to want to read the entire tutorial first before making any comments or corrections. Just I do this sometimes where it's like, oh, and then are you going to cover this? And I read like 2 paragraphs later and that they do cover it. So that'll save you time. And questions to ask yourself is, does the tutorial address the main task? Are the steps in order? And you can even, as an editor, test them to make sure they are. And then you'll want to look at a template or a style guide to make sure it's in the right shape. So for the Learn one, like, is there a prerequisite section? Is there a next step section? And you can even start there just to make sure things are consistent. And you can do this stage earlier in the draft process if you'd like. The second stage is content editing, and it ensures that it flows well and is consistent. You're going to want to review section by section here and ask yourself for the flow, are there tangents? Is something missing? Does something seem out of place? And this is really where you're going to want to focus on making sure the content is consistent with the HashiCorp voice or the voice of the style guide. And you want to also make sure it's presenting the author's thoughts and it's coming across how the author intended and that it's appropriate for the intended audience. And our final stage is copy editing, and this is to enhance the text readability by fixing spelling errors, grammar, style, and punctuation. You should definitely do this at the very end because you don't want to copy edit content that's going to change. Here you're going to review for tense and formatting as well, and against a style guide again. It generally helps if you have a good grasp of English composition. So, for me, it was forever since I took a high school composition class. So a good way to kind of like brush up is reading good writing and then working with an editor because they're going to have a good grasp of English composition. So self-editing tips. Use editing tools. Use a spell checker for sure. We all have that one word that we misspell. Mine's maintenance every time. I can never spell maintenance correctly. It's always wrong. I don't know why. So use a spell checker. It's going to catch those things for you so your editor doesn't have to. You don't have to. Give it some time. You want to come at it with fresh eyes, so a day or 2, or if you have a week, give it a week so you can't gloss over things that are supposed to be there because you've kind of forgotten. And then read it aloud. We've done this a lot today, so if you're reading it aloud and it's hard to read, then you probably need some editing. This will also help you with commas. Did you pause there? Did you not pause there? Is that pause natural? And then don't be afraid to delete sentences or paragraphs that aren't contributing. From my personal experience, when I first got started writing, I honestly deleted about half of what I wrote because I would go down rabbit holes and get excited, and then I'd come back to it and be like, no one needs this information. This is not helping at all. So I would just delete it or like stash it away for a new piece of content. So that's also like something very valid. If you get to that point and there's just so much stuff, you're like, hey, maybe this is a second tutorial or guide. And then simplify sentences and replace long or complex words with simple ones. We do have a copy edit exercise, which you all can go through later because we have the sample here of the updated version. So I'm going to send you all into breakout rooms for the remainder of this. And then we're going to come back and talk about next steps very quickly. So I'm going to let you all break out for a little bit. And then I'll see you back in like 7 minutes. Okay. So if you want to share your personal writing sample with me, my email, you can reply to my email or find it at the end of this deck. I'd be happy to give it an edit for you, or at least a partial edit. And then of course, email me if you have any questions. Few parting words, because I think it's really important, is practice, practice, practice. It is a skill that does need to be practiced. So you can practice this with anything. Like I said, sometimes I even practice in a small text message. And then my personal takeaways from my first writing workshop was anyone can be a good writer, even me. So that workshop gave me enough confidence to start trying and practicing, because good writing takes mindfulness and just some practice. And I knew I could definitely try. And then I just knew I needed to start with first things first, and from there it would be a lot easier. So I would ask what your takeaways were, because we're wrapping up today. But if you enjoyed today's workshop, or particularly liked any of your TAs, you can come work with us. We're hiring. So we have a couple open positions for the education team. If you can find it on our jobs board under the developer relations section. We have very different backgrounds. Some of us were developers before we started, some were in operations, some of us were technical writers, and some were even elementary school teachers. So it's pretty neat to have all those different backgrounds working together. And what we do, we write for HashiCorp Learn. We create demo apps as well, so it's not just all writing. We record videos, we lead workshops like this, and then what we like, get to know us. Well, we definitely all like the Oxford comma. We like reading from anything from grisly true crime novels to young adult fiction. And then some of us like savory cookies, maybe even someone on this call, and I won't name names, but someone has stated that savory cookies are good. So, and then final thoughts. Oh, I'm going to post a feedback survey as well, because I will continue to give this workshop. So please let me know what worked and what didn't work. And then if you did like it and you want to hear more from the education team here at HashiCorp, Rachel's leading the Building Better tutorials talk tomorrow at 12:08 Pacific time. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing so I can get into my deck and get you that feedback survey. Any questions about anything?
Just conceptually, and feel free to be as high level as you want, what is the review process like for going from I have a document on my machine to a published learn
Let me
thing?
get this Okay, so I just dropped in the feedback survey.
Yeah, so I can answer the review process one. Usually what we will do is we'll do a design doc first. So we'll like define the audience, kind of talk about the scenario and stuff like that.
I can't hear Judith at least.
Oh, can anyone hear me?
I can hear
I can
you.
hear you.
Is it,
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
it's me?
Yes.
Oh, geez.
So we'll do a design doc. We'll like kind of work through who's the audience, what's the point we're trying to get across. We check that with our stakeholders. So if there's PM or support or whoever we're working with, that's kind of the review stage for them. Then we'll do the outline, which is like, what are the steps? What are the code snippets? We'll draft the doc actually in Google Docs usually, because just like editing code is horrible in Google Docs, editing English is kind of horrible in GitHub. And then once the like English class is done, we'll move it over to PR stage, and Learn itself is just a static website. So like once it's in PR, you're usually pretty solid with it. You just like look at the local build and make sure that everything looks right once you put it on our platform, and then you go. My team usually will either get a review from me or like a review from 2 other team members, and then they're set to go. But like every tutorial is edited by somebody. And I think that's really, really important, because you find a lot of technical issues when you run it on 2 different people's machines. So yeah, that's kind of our review process.
We definitely leveraged the GitHub PR feature, because if you look at files change, it's so easy to add suggestions and then a comment of like, hey, I think this is written in a passive language. Use my suggestion, that it's more active. So it's common for a PR to go back and forth quite a bit. But a lot of that is prevented with what Judith said with the design document, because I can only imagine what it would be like without it, because then people would have different, like, oh, I thought you were going to write about this. No, I'm going to write about this. So, but yeah, the PR process is a big step for sure.
If you're all interested, on my personal blog, I wrote about the design doc, and I can send that along in this email. I am like, that blog is so old, so forgive me for my bad writing. I'm just gonna say that now. But it was one of the first things I created from that instructional design workshop that I took, or course that I took forever ago, and I've taken it with me at every job. It's been really useful, which is why I put it on my personal blog, because then it's my IP and not company's IP. So.
This might sound like a silly question. Is there anything like an English language linter? So like you can, when you've written something, before it even gets pushed in, you can automate a bunch of your style guide checks or anything like that?
Yeah, we actually have a linter that runs on our PRs to help pick out some things, but one of our teammates, Charlie Boycell, has converted all his scripts, or is working on converting them to Veil. So I haven't used Veil before, but it'll lint for you. So I know he was linting specifically for like ableist language for a while to make sure, because we just would say run this command all the time. So it'd pick out ableist language as well as like spelling errors. So I didn't mention that today, but because that's way more advanced than like a spell checker, and that's like on you to create it. But yeah, I've been hearing a lot of good things about Veil lately.
Yeah, I just linked to Veil at the bottom there. But one of the things that you can do is you can implement your own styling guide. But out of the box, you can use some of the more well-established styling guides. So Microsoft, Google, and I think a few others has those available, so that you can just import them and run that into your pipeline as wanted. But yes, we use Veil as well. I also shared another cool app worth knowing for you all, Hemingway app. It's a good way to identify reading level complexity. And it does a decent job of catching some passive language sometimes, but that's another neat one for you to be aware of. Also, Grammarly, you don't have to pay to use their editor app. You can use it and get a lot of the benefits off of that. We usually use Grammarly to review blog submissions, but yeah, those are some of the needful tools for you guys to have.
Just a quick question on content formatting. I'm not sure, what would you recommend? Sometimes we have these pop-up boxes, tip boxes you can do, like warning info and all that. And I myself tend to use it a bit too much when I say warn here. Like, do you have like recommendation or guidance on that?
I have strong feelings, which I don't know if they're not really policy, but they're my opinion. I would say use those very, very sparingly. The point of them is that they're, formatting that is supposed to call out something that if you do not do it, the thing will not work. And if you desensitize users to them, they will definitely just gloss right over. And so I think only for the most important stuff. We've been seeing a little bit of formatting creep in our tutorials recently, and people started using them to link out to additional resources or something like that. And that's a big only for the most important things. Don't commit sensitive data to version control is one that we'd definitely use a big red warning box for. But in general, just the most important stuff.
Another way to, definitely use them sparingly, but a good way to think about it is put that really important stuff before the command, before they're supposed to do the thing, and then after the command can be the more passive information. So we do focus on doing first, and you want to make sure that they're doing it correctly. So it's good to put that up front, and that'll help train the reader to be I definitely need to read what's coming before this command, because if I don't, I'm not going to run it correctly.
And I think it's worth pointing out, just if it's in the documentation or the guide, it's important. I mean, it's it wouldn't be in there if it wasn't important. So
this might be a reader's problem, but do you have anything for when you make a guide and you put all of the code snippets in and then people just skip through to the next code snippet and copy paste? Is there a good way of hiding a big echo saying, why are you copy and pasting this? You do not need to run this command. The sentence directly before says, do not run this.
Yeah, so we can actually hide the clipboard button. So
our Markdown preview does not have a clipboard function. This is people just going copy paste. And I was like, you're doing what? And I realized they were installing the Mac version on their Linux machine because they'd just gone from top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a good sign that it should be a different page.
I personally solved it by using expandable boxes. So the user, you just save a title, there's the command title, and they have to actually click it. And then, so you force them to do one extra step. Then they might, actually, because the expandable boxes depending on what you're using, you can put a title of the box. So you can, this is for Mac.
In general,
this is for Linux.
In general, we try really hard not to serialize alternatives. Just exactly because of that problem. So in the reference documentation, I think it's pretty common to expect that you're going to read down and you're going to learn about all your options. But for tutorials specifically, the idea is that they run from top to bottom. And so in general, we either will split them into two different sets of instructions so that you can run them top to bottom, or we have fancy tabs. But if you don't have fancy tabs, it might be a different page.
Yeah, we're definitely lucky with all our fancy React plugins on our Learn site that we get to do these things to make it easier on our readers. I realize that now that we're maybe a little spoiled.
Just a question on whether the tutorials help actually reverse it helps with development. Do you find that if we write a tutorial that's 20, 30 steps, does that simply imply okay, yeah, these bunch of steps, let's make a tool to do it all automatically and not have the user deal with all of this themselves?
Yeah, I think 20 or 30 steps is a lot for a user to really understand. So we'll write tutorials that have 20 or 30 commands, but what we try and do is chunk them under those headings for the higher level tasks that they're doing. So it's if you have to do 5 things to install something, and then you have to do 7 things to configure something, and then you have to do 4 things to deploy it, and then you have to do 8 things to check it, you'll put your headings as install, configure, deploy, and check. instead of, instead of making each one of those steps its own thing, you'll kind of group them together a little bit. Yeah, that can help.
It seems like people are dropping, so I'm going to go ahead and close the Zoom, but you can all expect an email from me later today. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.